I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the doorway of my own kitchen, holding a dish towel I'd had for 15 years. And I thought, this is the last time. My name doesn't matter as much as the story. What matters is that I'm 67 years old. I live in Sudbury, Ontario, and I spent 2 years letting my son-in-law treat my home like a hotel he hadn't bothered to pay for. This is how it ended, and this is how it started. My husband Gerald passed away in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We'd been married 31 years, and the house on Larch Street had been ours together since 1994. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with the vegetable garden I'd been tending since our youngest was in diapers, a kitchen with the window that always caught the afternoon light just right. Gerald used to sit at the kitchen table after supper and read the paper there. When he was gone, I kept his chair turned slightly toward the window, the way he'd always had it. Just couldn't bring myself to move it. I went back to work part-time at the library for a while, just to have somewhere to be. I had my pension, Gerald's life insurance, and what we'd saved together over the years. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. A financial advisor at TD had helped me set things up properly. GICs, a bit in the market, nothing reckless. I wasn't going to need to ask anyone for help. My daughter Colette called me every Sunday. She lived in Hamilton with her husband Noel and their little boy Owen, who was 4 at the time. Noel ran a renovation contracting business that he'd started just before the pandemic. And like a lot of those businesses, it had never quite found its footing. He was always chasing invoices, always waiting on a permit, always one slow month away from real trouble. Colette worked as a dental hygienist, so they weren't destitute, but the pressure was constant. In November of 2022, she called on a Wednesday instead of a Sunday, which I already knew meant something was wrong. "Mom," she said, "Noel's business is in serious trouble. We might lose the apartment." I asked her to tell me everything. She did. There were unpaid suppliers, a lawsuit from a client who said the work was substandard, which Noel disputed and still disputes, and credit card debt they'd run up trying to bridge the gaps. The total was somewhere around $40,000. I didn't say yes immediately. I want to be clear about that. I sat with it for 2 days. I called my financial advisor and asked what I could responsibly liquidate. I prayed about it, honestly. Gerald would have been cautious. He was always the one who said love doesn't mean unlimited credit. But these were my grandchild's parents. And Colette was my daughter. I told her I could help with $20,000. She cried. Noel got on the phone and thanked me in this serious, formal way he had and said they'd pay it back within 3 years. That was the first $20,000. The second call came in February. Another supplier threatening to go to collections. Could I do another 10? I said yes. I took a photo of the e-transfer confirmation and wrote the date in a small red notebook I kept in my nightstand. I'm not sure why I started doing that. Some instinct, maybe. Gerald used to say I had good instincts and didn't trust them enough. By April, Colette called to say the apartment situation had gotten impossible. Their lease was up in June. They couldn't qualify for a new rental with Noel's current credit, and would it be possible, just temporarily, for them to stay with me in Sudbury while they got back on their feet? Owen would be in kindergarten in September. They figured 6 months, maybe 8. They'd help with groceries, help around the house, and Noel could pick up local contracting work in the meantime. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I had the space. They arrived on the 1st of June with a moving truck that was considerably fuller than a few months of stuff usually looks. I helped carry boxes. Owen ran straight to the backyard and asked if he could water my tomatoes. I thought, this is going to be fine. This is my family. The first change happened 3 weeks in. I came home from a library volunteer shift to find my living room rearranged. The couch had been pushed against the far wall. The side table Gerald and I had bought at an estate sale in Manitoulin was moved to the corner, and a large television, much bigger than my old one, had been mounted on the wall above the fireplace. Noah was standing back admiring it like he'd done me a favor. "Figured this was a better layout," he said. "More comfortable for everyone." I looked at the wall where he drilled mounting bolts into my plaster. I looked at Gerald's side table, angled away in the corner. I said, "Next time, please ask me first." He nodded. He said, "Of course, absolutely." He said it the way people say it when they don't mean it at all. Colette came in from the kitchen and said the new layout really was better, didn't I think? I said I was going to make tea, and I went into the kitchen and I stood at my kettle for a long time. I should have said more. I know that now. But Colette looked tired in a way that worried me, thinner than she should have been, quieter, and Noel was already back to his regular self by dinner, refilling Owen's juice and telling a story about a job estimate he'd given in Chelmsford. I let it go. That summer was full of small things. Noel reorganized my garage without asking, saying it was more efficient. I came home one day to find he'd thrown out a set of ceramic planters I'd had for 12 years because they were cracked and taking up space. One of them wasn't cracked at all. He moved Gerald's chair away from the kitchen window because it was in the traffic pattern. I moved it back. He moved it again. I moved it back again, and I didn't say anything, but I wrote down the date in my red notebook. Colette started referring to our house in conversation. Not intentionally, I think, just the way language shifts when you settle somewhere. But I noticed the bedroom situation happened in August. Their room, the guest room, was fine. 3-piece ensuite, good closet, south-facing window. But Noel began mentioning, casually and often, that the room was small for the three of them. Owen was sleeping in a porte-coriv in the corner, and that wasn't ideal long-term. My room, the primary bedroom, had an attached bathroom and was considerably larger. I won't go through the whole conversation because it makes me tired to remember it. The summary is, Colette asked if I'd consider switching just while they were here, and she framed it as a practical matter of square footage. I said I'd think about it. I didn't sleep well for 3 nights. In the end, I told myself that Owen was a child and I was an adult, and I could make a sacrifice for a few months. I moved into the guest room. I want you to understand what that felt like. I had slept in that primary bedroom for 28 years. Gerald had died in that room. I had put his reading glasses in the drawer of that nightstand because I hadn't been able to move them. When I carried my things to the guest room, I brought the reading glasses with me. I set them on my new nightstand, and I told myself, 6 months, 8 months, this is temporary. The reading glasses were the thing I thought about the most. Later, when I was trying to understand why I had allowed so much. In October, Owen started kindergarten at Fielding Road Public School, and Colette was working at a dental clinic in Sudbury she'd found locum shifts at. Things felt almost normal for a while. Noel was getting some work. Small jobs, mostly bathroom renovations and deck repairs. He seemed more optimistic. I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Then he told me he wanted to tear out part of my vegetable garden. The garden was along the south fence, about 12 meters long. I'd been growing in it for over 20 years. Tomatoes, beans, zucchini, a row of herbs along the near edge. Gerald had helped me build the raised beds the first summer we had the house. Every spring when I turned the soil, I still thought of him. Noel wanted to pour a gravel pad there for his work van and a trailer he was renting. He said the driveway wasn't long enough and the side yard wasn't being fully utilized. I said no, directly and without softening. I said that garden is not available for other uses. He said he understood. He said he'd figure something out. 2 weeks later, I came home to find a section of my raised beds, about a third of the garden, had been cleared. The lumber framing had been stacked against the fence. The soil had been raked flat. He hadn't started the gravel yet, but the intention was obvious. I stood at the back door and I looked at what was gone. Those beds had been there since 1995. I had grown food in them through 2 pregnancies, through Gerald's first health scare in 2009, through the pandemic, through the first spring after he died when gardening was the only thing that got me outside. They were not just lumber and soil. They were not just a side yard. I went inside. I didn't suitcase. I didn't table that mic. But I knew that what I would say, I couldn't take back. I called Colette's cell from my room, and she didn't answer. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, Gerald's reading glasses on the nightstand beside me, and I opened my red notebook and I wrote the date and 2 words. The garden. That was the night I understood it wasn't going to fix itself. The dinner happened in March. Colette had been planning it for weeks. A birthday dinner for Noel. 12 people around my dining table. She handled most of the arrangements, and I want to be fair, she did work hard on it. She bought the food, she decorated, she set the table beautifully. I offered to help, and she gave me a few tasks. A green salad, rolls, keeping Owen occupied while she got ready. The guests arrived at 7. These were Noel's friends and a few of their neighbors from Hamilton who'd driven up. I knew one couple. The rest were strangers to me. I greeted people at the door. I put out the food I prepared. I felt like a woman standing in her own home, which, apparently, was an illusion I'd been maintaining for some time. At some point, I came into the dining room and the seating was arranged, and I looked for where I was meant to sit. There was no chair for me at the table. I stood there a moment, genuinely confused. Colette was in the kitchen. I counted the seats. 12 chairs for 12 guests, and Noel at the head. Owen was at a small folding table set up near the window. I pulled a chair from the wall and began to bring it to the table. Noel looked up. He said, "We've got it set. We're full." I said, "I'll just pull in." He said, "There's no room. You can eat with Owen." The table went quiet for just a second. One of the women across from him, I don't know her name, looked down at her plate. I set the chair back against the wall. I went to the kitchen. I made up a small plate. I sat with Owen at his little folding table and I helped him cut his chicken, and Owen told me about something that happened at recess that week. And I listened and I smiled and I did not cry until later, alone in the guest room with the door closed. That was the last night. The next morning is Saturday. Colette came downstairs early and found me at the kitchen table with my tea and my red notebook open in front of me. I had spent most of the night with it. She sat down. She knew, I think. She didn't try to explain what had happened at dinner. She said, "Mom, I know things haven't been." I said, "I want you to have a plan to leave by the end of April." Her face changed. She said that wasn't enough time, that Owen was settled in school, that Noel's work was finally picking up. I said, "April 30th. She cried. She said I was being hard on her. She said after everything she and Noel had been through, she'd expected more from me. I thought about Gerald's chair being moved away from the window. I thought about the planters that weren't cracked. I thought about waking up in the guest room for 8 months with a pair of reading glasses on the nightstand that should have been on a different nightstand. I thought about sitting at a children's table in my own dining room while 12 strangers ate at my table. I said, I think you should call a real estate agent and look at rentals in Hamilton. Owen can finish the school year here. I'm happy to have him, and you and Noel can get settled first. But I need my home back." She left the room. Noel came downstairs an hour later and tried to talk to me. He used a tone I hadn't heard from him before, conciliatory, almost gentle, which told me Colette had given him the summary. He said he hoped we could find a solution that worked for everyone. I told him I had found the solution and I'd shared it with Colette, and I stood up and washed my mug and went to change out of my housecoat because I was done talking. They hired a lawyer. I was genuinely surprised by this. I shouldn't have been, but I was. They sent a letter through a paralegal in Hamilton claiming that the contributions to the household over the 18 months constituted a tenancy arrangement that entitled them to 60 days formal notice under the Ontario Residential Tenancies Act. They were also asserting that the funds I had transferred, the $30,000 over those first months, were a gift, not a loan, and no repayment was owed. I called a lawyer of my own, a woman in Sudbury who had been recommended by someone at my church. I sat across from her desk, and I put the red notebook on her desk, and I watched her read through it. Every date, every amount, every note about Gerald's chair, the planters, the garden beds. She looked up and said, "Did you keep the e-transfer records?" I said I had them all. I also had the photos I'd taken of the confirmations. I had texts from Colette referencing the amounts as loans with phrases like, "We'll pay you back," and "Once Noel's business is stable." I had the screenshot where she said, "Thank you for lending us this," with a heart emoji after it. I had them. The lawyer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This is a stronger position than most people come to me with." The paralegal's claim about tenancy didn't hold up. My lawyer filed a response that established the living arrangement was with a family member and explicitly not a tenancy under the Act, supported by the fact that no rent was ever charged, no lease was ever signed, and the agreement had always been described, in writing, multiple times, as temporary. The claim about the $30,000 was addressed with my documentation. We filed for repayment. It took 7 months. There were 2 court dates. A mediation session I found exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sitting in a room with Noel's lawyer across a table, having every item in my red notebook read back to me. The raised beds, the ceramic planters, the birthday dinner. In the end, Noel was ordered to repay $22,000. The remaining $8,000 was considered partially offset by their costs of living during the stay, a compromise my lawyer had anticipated and prepared me for. We accepted it. The unauthorized removal of the garden beds was noted in the judgment. There was no specific penalty attached to it, but it was on the record. Colette and I didn't speak for 4 months after they moved out. Owen sent me a drawing in the mail around Christmas. A picture of a house with a garden and a woman with gray hair and a sun in the corner. I put it on my refrigerator and I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I called Colette in January. She answered. We talked for almost an hour and it wasn't easy and it wasn't fixed, but it was a beginning. The primary bedroom is mine again. I moved back in on the 1st of May. The same week my tulip bulbs finally came up along the front walk, the way they do every spring, stubborn and reliable. I put Gerald's reading glasses back in the nightstand drawer where they belong. I replanted part of the garden that summer. The far section where the beds were torn out, I left as a small lawn area. Owen likes to sit there when he visits now, which he does on certain Saturdays with Colette. It's not the same as it was. Very few things are. But when I walk through my front door, it is my home I am walking into. I can feel the difference. It's the kind of thing you don't notice until it's gone and then you get it back. And the relief of it, of knowing where you stand in your own life, is not small. The chair is back at the window. The afternoon light still comes through the same way it always did. And some evenings I sit there in Gerald's chair, and I read, and I watch the yard go quiet, and I think I should have trusted my instincts sooner. But I know that now. I still think about that red notebook. Not the legal outcome, not the court dates, the notebook. The fact that some quiet part of me knew from early on that I needed to write things down. That instinct was the first honest thing I did in 2 years. What I've come to understand is that what happened in my home on Larch Street wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow accumulation of small choices, mine as much as theirs. Every time I moved Gerald's chair back without saying anything, every time I told myself 6 more months, just be patient, they're family. I kept choosing peace over clarity, and I convinced myself that was the same as being kind. It wasn't. Kindness without honesty is just postponement. And what gets postponed long enough doesn't disappear, it compounds. Noel didn't become the person he became overnight. Neither did Colette. And I didn't become someone who sat at a children's table in her own dining room overnight either. It happened in increments, and most of those increments felt, at the time, like reasonable accommodations. That's the thing nobody tells you about losing your footing in your own life. It rarely feels dramatic when it's happening. It feels like being considerate. It feels like not wanting to make things harder. And then one day you're holding a dish towel in the doorway of your own kitchen, and you realize you've been a guest in your own house for the better part of 2 years. What brought me back wasn't anger, though there was anger. It was something steadier than that. It was the recognition that I had let go of my own judgment, the same judgment that had helped me raise a daughter, manage my finances sensibly, tend a garden for 20 years, sit with a dying husband, and hold things together afterward. I hadn't lost that judgment. I just stopped consulting it. The night I sat with the red notebook after the dinner, I did something I should have done much earlier. I thought clearly about what was true, what was documented, and what I was actually entitled to. That's not hardness. That's just being honest with yourself about what you know. The money mattered. $22,000 recovered mattered. But what mattered more was the practice of seeing the situation as it actually was, not as I wished it to be, not softened by love for my daughter or guilt about Noel's struggling business, but clearly, once I could see it clearly, I knew what to do. And I did it. Owen's drawing is still on my refrigerator. The house with the garden, the gray-haired woman, the sun in the corner. He drew it without knowing any of the adult part of the story, and somehow he drew it without knowing any of the adult part of the story. And somehow he got it exactly right. There's something in that. A child's understanding that a home and the person who lives in it belong together. I planted beans along the south fence this past May. The section Noel cleared is still on, and I've made my peace with that. What I haven't made peace with, and don't intend to, is the idea that being generous means being boundaryless, or that loving someone means absorbing whatever they take from you without accounting for it. Those aren't the same thing. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I'd rather have learned it the hard way than not at all. The chair is back at the window. That's enough.